Dorothea Lange was a pioneering documentary photographer who became one of the most influential visual artists of the 20th century, yet her personal struggles and complicated legacy reveal a woman far more complex than the iconic images she created. Dorothea Margaretta Nutzhorn, photographer, artist, and chronicler of human suffering, was born in Hoboken, New Jersey on May 26, 1895. She came from a German immigrant family, though her childhood would be marked by abandonment and physical disability that shaped her artistic vision. She had a penetrating gaze and an ability to connect with her subjects that transformed documentary photography. Lange's early years were marked by hardship and resilience. When she was 7 years old, she contracted polio, which left her with a weakened right leg and a permanent limp. The disability affected her profoundly, making her feel different and vulnerable, but it also gave her an empathy for outsiders and sufferers that would define her photographic work. Then, when she was 12, her father abandoned the family, simply walking out and never returning. The betrayal was so deep that Dorothea eventually dropped her father's surname, Nutzhorn, and took her mother's maiden name, Lange. These twin traumas of illness and abandonment created in Lange both a fierce independence and a profound understanding of human suffering. Despite the family's reduced circumstances, Lange's mother, Joan, worked as a librarian to support Dorothea and her brother. Lange attended Wadley High School in Manhattan, traveling daily from Hoboken through neighborhoods that exposed her to poverty and immigrant struggles. After graduating in 1913, Lange announced that she wanted to become a photographer, though she had never owned a camera and had no technical training. It was an audacious decision, typical of Lange's determination to create her own path. She apprenticed herself to several New York photographers, learning the technical aspects of the craft while studying photography with Clarence White at Columbia University. White was a pictorialist photographer who emphasized artistic composition and emotional content, lessons that would influence Lange's later documentary work. In 1918, at age 23, Lange set out with a female friend to travel around the world. They made it as far as San Francisco before their money was stolen, forcing them to stop. Lange found work in a photo finishing shop and decided to stay in San Francisco. Within a year, she had saved enough money to open her own portrait studio. Lange's portrait studio on Sutter Street became successful, attracting wealthy clients who appreciated her artistic eye and her ability to capture personality in formal portraits. She photographed San Francisco's social elite, creating soft-focus artistic portraits that were fashionable at the time. The studio provided financial security and professional recognition, though the work was far from the documentary photography that would later define her career. In 1920, Lange married Maynard Dixon, a respected Western painter 20 years her senior. Dixon was an established artist with a romantic vision of the American West and Native American culture. The marriage brought Lange into San Francisco's bohemian art community, but it was complicated from the start. Dixon was frequently absent, traveling to paint Western landscapes, while Lange managed the studio and eventually raised their 2 sons. The couple had different temperaments and different approaches to art. Dixon's romantic paintings of cowboys and Indians seemed increasingly out of touch with modern realities, while Lange was beginning to see photography as a tool for social documentation rather than artistic portraiture. The stock market crash of 1929 and the subsequent Great Depression transformed Lange's life and work. As the Depression deepened, unemployed men began appearing on the streets outside her studio window. Lange found herself drawn to photograph them, venturing out of her comfortable studio into the breadlines and labor demonstrations of San Francisco. In 1933, she photographed a man standing in a breadline, his back to the camera, surrounded by the crowd but utterly alone. The photograph, White Angel Breadline, marked Lange's transition from portrait photographer to documentary photographer. She had discovered her true subject, the struggles of ordinary people against economic forces beyond their control. Lange's new direction created tension in her marriage. Dixon disapproved of her documentary work, seeing it as propaganda rather than art. Meanwhile, Lange had met Paul Schuster Taylor, an economics professor at the University of California who was studying agricultural labor and rural poverty. Taylor recognized that Lange's photographs could provide powerful visual evidence for his research. They began collaborating, with Taylor providing context and analysis while Lange provided images. Their professional partnership soon became personal. In 1935, Lange divorced Dixon and married Taylor. The divorce was painful, particularly regarding custody of their sons, who spent much of their childhood with Dixon or in boarding schools. Lange's devotion to her work often came at the expense of her family, a contradiction that troubled her throughout her life. Taylor's connections helped Lange secure a position with the Resettlement Administration, later renamed the Farm Security Administration. The FSA was a New Deal agency created to document rural poverty and the government's efforts to address it. Under the direction of Roy Stryker, the FSA photography project employed several photographers to create a comprehensive visual record of Depression-era America. Lange became one of the most important photographers in the project, traveling throughout California and the American West to document migrant workers, displaced farmers, and rural poverty. Her photographs combined artistic composition with social documentation, creating images that were both beautiful and devastating. Lange's working method was distinctive and effective. She would spend time with her subjects, talking with them and listening to their stories before photographing them. She believed that understanding people's lives was essential to photographing them honestly. She often traveled with Taylor, who would interview subjects while Lange photographed them, creating a combination of visual and written documentation. Lange's physical disability, her limp, actually helped her connect with subjects. She moved slowly and seemed vulnerable herself, which made people less guarded around her. She had a gift for making people feel seen and respected, even in their most desperate circumstances. In March 1936, Lange was driving home from a month-long photography trip when she passed a sign for a pea pickers camp. She drove past it, but something made her turn around and go back. At the camp, she found a destitute mother with her children huddled in a lean-to tent. The woman, Florence Owens Thompson, was 32 years old but looked much older, worn down by poverty and hardship. Lange later said she was drawn to the woman like a magnet. She made 5 exposures in about 10 minutes, moving closer with each shot. She did not ask the woman's name, and the woman did not ask what the photographs would be used for. The final image, showing Thompson with her hand raised to her face, her brow furrowed with worry, and 2 children leaning on her shoulders with their faces turned away, became Migrant Mother, the most famous photograph of the Depression era. Migrant Mother appeared in newspapers within days and became an instant icon of Depression suffering. The photograph seemed to capture everything about the era: the poverty, the displacement, the maternal anxiety, the human cost of economic collapse. The image helped bring relief supplies to the pea pickers camp, though Thompson herself received nothing and later resented that Lange had profited from her misery. The photograph made Lange famous and became the defining image of her career, though she would take thousands of other powerful photographs. Migrant Mother demonstrated Lange's genius for finding universal meaning in individual suffering, for creating images that transcended their specific circumstances to become symbols of human endurance. Lange continued working for the FSA until 1939, documenting migrant labor camps, displaced farmers, and rural communities throughout the West and South. Her photographs appeared in newspapers, magazines, and government publications, shaping public understanding of the Depression and building support for New Deal programs. She collaborated with Taylor on An American Exodus, a book combining photographs and text to document the migration of displaced farmers from the Dust Bowl to California. The book was published in 1939 to critical acclaim, though it sold poorly. Lange's FSA work established her reputation as one of America's greatest documentary photographers, creating a visual archive that remains the most powerful record of Depression-era America. When World War II began, Lange found a new subject that would prove controversial and painful. In 1942, following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the forced removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast to internment camps. Lange was hired by the War Relocation Authority to document the evacuation and internment. She approached the assignment with her characteristic empathy, photographing Japanese American families as they were forced to leave their homes and businesses, as they waited in assembly centers, and as they arrived at the desolate internment camps. Her photographs showed the dignity of the internees and the injustice of their treatment. She photographed children pledging allegiance to the flag at schools behind barbed wire, families eating in mess halls, and the bleak landscape of the camps. The War Relocation Authority suppressed most of Lange's internment photographs, impounding them because they were too sympathetic to the internees and too critical of the government's policy. The images were not widely seen until decades later, after Lange's death. The suppression was a bitter disappointment for Lange, who believed the photographs documented a grave injustice. Her internment work demonstrated her commitment to truth and her willingness to challenge official narratives, even when employed by the government. The photographs remain some of the most important visual documentation of one of the darkest chapters in American history, a record of systematic injustice carried out against American citizens because of their ethnicity. After the war, Lange continued her documentary work, though without the institutional support of the FSA. She photographed for magazines including Life and Fortune, documenting subjects ranging from the founding of the United Nations to rural life in Ireland. She worked more slowly now, hampered by recurring health problems. In 1945, she suffered the first of several bouts of gastric illness that would plague her for the rest of her life. She was eventually diagnosed with peptic ulcers and later with post-polio syndrome, which caused increased weakness and pain in her damaged leg. The physical suffering made her work more difficult, but she continued photographing, driven by her belief in the power of images to create understanding and empathy. Lange's personal life remained complicated. Her relationship with her children, particularly her sons from her first marriage, was strained by her long absences and her devotion to work over family. Her son Daniel later said that his mother was more interested in other people's children than in her own. The accusation was harsh but contained truth. Lange was capable of great empathy for strangers, but sometimes failed to show the same compassion to those closest to her. Her marriage to Taylor was intellectually stimulating and professionally productive, but it was also marked by periods of separation and tension. Taylor supported Lange's work, but he also made demands on her time and energy. The contradiction between Lange's public image as a chronicler of family suffering and her private struggles as a mother and wife troubled her throughout her life. In the 1950s, Lange became interested in photographing closer to home, documenting her own family and the landscape around her Berkeley home. She created a series of photographs of her grandchildren and the changing seasons in her garden, images that were more personal and intimate than her earlier documentary work. She also began working on a photographic essay about the public defender system, spending months in courtrooms and jails photographing defendants and their attorneys. The project was never completed, but it showed Lange's continued interest in documenting injustice and her belief in the dignity of all people, even those accused of crimes. In 1954, Lange co-founded Aperture magazine with several other photographers, including Ansel Adams and Minor White. Aperture became an important venue for serious photographic work and critical writing about photography. Lange's involvement demonstrated her commitment to photography as an art form and her desire to create institutional support for documentary photography. However, her relationship with the other founders was sometimes difficult. Adams, in particular, disagreed with Lange about the purpose of photography. Adams believed in photography as pure art, while Lange insisted that photography should serve social purposes. The disagreement reflected larger debates about whether documentary photography was journalism or art, debates that continue today. In 1958, Lange was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. The diagnosis was devastating, though doctors initially believed the cancer could be treated. Lange underwent surgery and seemed to recover, but the cancer returned. Despite her illness, Lange continued working. In 1964, the Museum of Modern Art in New York offered her a retrospective exhibition, the first such exhibition for a female photographer. Lange threw herself into preparing for the exhibition, selecting photographs, writing captions, and designing the installation. She worked obsessively, driven by the knowledge that this would be her final statement, her chance to shape how her work would be remembered. The preparation of the exhibition exhausted Lange, but she was determined to see it completed. She selected photographs from throughout her career, including her early portrait work, her FSA photographs, her internment images, and her later personal work. She wrote an extended caption for each photograph, providing context and explaining her intentions. She designed the exhibition layout herself, controlling every detail. The work took months and consumed all her remaining energy. By the time the exhibition was ready to open in January 1966, Lange was gravely ill. Dorothea Lange died on October 11, 1965, 3 months before her retrospective opened at the Museum of Modern Art. She was 70 years old. The cause of death was esophageal cancer, the disease she had fought for 7 years. Lange's funeral was held in Berkeley and she was cremated. Her ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean. The Museum of Modern Art exhibition opened as planned in January 1966, becoming a posthumous triumph. Critics praised Lange's compassion, her technical skill, and her ability to find beauty in suffering. The exhibition established Lange's reputation as one of the greatest photographers of the 20th century, though she did not live to see it. Lange's legacy is profound and multifaceted. She transformed documentary photography from simple recording to art, creating images that were both factual documents and powerful emotional statements. Her photographs of the Great Depression remain the definitive visual record of that era, images that continue to shape how Americans understand their history. Migrant Mother has become one of the most recognized photographs in the world, an icon of maternal suffering and human endurance. Her internment photographs documented a shameful episode in American history and gave dignity to people whose rights were violated by their own government. Her working method, based on empathy and respect for subjects, established standards for ethical documentary photography. Yet Lange's legacy is also complicated by contradictions. She was a champion of families who struggled with her own family relationships. She was a documentarian of poverty who lived comfortably in Berkeley. She was celebrated for her compassion for strangers, but could be difficult and demanding with colleagues and family. She believed in the power of photography to create social change, yet many of her most powerful images were suppressed or ignored by those in power. She worked for government agencies, but was willing to challenge government policies through her photographs. These contradictions do not diminish her achievements, but they reveal a more complex person than the saintly figure sometimes portrayed in hagiographic accounts. Modern scholars have examined Lange's work with more critical eyes, noting issues of representation and power in her photographs. Some have questioned whether Lange exploited her subjects, using their suffering to advance her own career. Others have noted that her photographs sometimes reinforced stereotypes about poverty and rural life. The fact that Florence Thompson received nothing from Migrant Mother, while Lange became famous, raises troubling questions about the ethics of documentary photography. These criticisms are important and should not be dismissed, but they should be understood in the context of Lange's time and her genuine commitment to social justice. Perhaps the most fitting assessment of Dorothea Lange is that she was a great artist who used her gifts in service of human dignity. She had extraordinary talent as a photographer, combining technical mastery with emotional intelligence and compositional genius. She chose to use that talent to document suffering and injustice rather than to create art for art's sake. She believed that photographs could make people care about others, could create empathy across barriers of class and geography. This belief drove her work and gave it purpose beyond aesthetic achievement. Whether her photographs actually created social change is debatable, but they certainly created a visual record that continues to move and educate viewers decades after they were made. Lange represents a particular type of American artist, the documentarian who believes that art should serve social purposes, that beauty can be found in truth, and that showing suffering can lead to compassion. History has validated her approach, as documentary photography has become recognized as both art and journalism, both aesthetic achievement and social commentary. Lange's tragedy was not that she failed to achieve recognition, but that recognition came too late for her to fully enjoy it, and that the personal costs of her devotion to work were high. In the end, Dorothea Lange was neither simply a hero nor a flawed hypocrite, but rather a brilliant photographer and committed documentarian who made difficult choices in pursuit of her vision. Her legacy includes images that have become part of America's collective memory and a body of work that continues to inspire photographers and move viewers. She is remembered today for Migrant Mother and her Depression photographs, for her internment documentation, and for establishing documentary photography as a legitimate art form. This seems fitting for a woman who devoted her life to making visible the invisible, to giving dignity to the dispossessed, and to creating beauty from suffering.